And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts.
America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, brighter, happier, stronger, freer, greater, and more united than ever before.
The Liberty Podcast is brought to you by Proven Arms and Outfitters, specializing in rifles, pistols, tactical gear, and more. Learn more at ProvenOutfitters.com.
Welcome back to the Liberty Podcast. It is the 16th day of October 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, by the time you see this, we will be a mere 19 days removed from Election Day, November 5. But before that big momentous day, guess what we get to do? First, vote early, starting when? October 17th, which is when you'll be seeing me on your screen. And that will go on until November 2nd at two fabulous locations in Moore County. One at the Aberdeen Recreation Center next to the beautiful lake off of Highway 1. The other at the Moore County Ag Center, that's Agriculture, not Aggravation Center, in Carthage. No lake at the Ag Center, but polling booths just the same. And you can vote during the weekdays from 8 to 7:30, 8 a.m., which is when most Democrats are just waking up, to 7:30 p.m. For those of you keeping track, that's an 11 and a half hour window for you to find 10 to 15 minutes to go vote. And before you go, make sure you're informed. Make sure you've looked at both sides of a sample ballot so that you realize that there are a lot of people running for office and we need to vote for all of them. All of them. Not just the president, not just the governor, not just the House of Representatives, not just the state Supreme Court. Everybody. Got it? Okay. That'll go on till November 2. And then we'll take the weekend off. And then we'll stampede to the polls on Election Day. But the strategy this year, remember this. Get your vote in. Vote early. Vote right away as soon as you can. Don't go to the polls by yourself. Bring one or more other voters, even people that you don't like very much. Just make sure they vote and that they're informed about what the consequences of their votes will be, especially if they vote for Democrats. Democrats? Oh yeah. You mean the ones that go around removing campaign signs? Those Democrats? That's right. The now former chairman of the Moore County Democrat Party, former because he was forced to resign, he got caught with his paws lifting Republican campaign signs out of the ground and placing them in his vehicle. He was caught not just by some citizen patriot, but by a sheriff's deputy. Well, what do you know? What do you know about that? So now Mr. Lowell Simon, who also likes to be a perpetual candidate for the North Carolina House seat in his district, 78. He lost twice before, decisively. One year he ran on a legalized marijuana platform that went over like a lead balloon, a balloon being piloted by a person who's very high, and I don't mean in terms of altitude. But anyway, he's gone now from the Moore County Democrat Party, not such as it is, a very fledgling sort of gasping for air group, as the Republicans outnumber 2-1 in most cases. Not to mention the independents as well, who make up a large chunk of our voting population. But the folks at Fox News noticed the story, and they decided to, let's see, a 68-year-old man who's the chairman of a county Democrat party in a battleground state, North Carolina. That's kind of a news story. He got caught stealing signs. So now it's on foxnews.com. Go check it out. Can't make it up. Can't make it up. Okay, now let's talk about polls for a minute. And I don't mean the polling stations. I mean the polling entities that tell us or try to explain to us who's leading and who's trailing in these various races, with most eyes fixated on Donald J. Trump versus Kamala Harris, vice president, apparently in name only. Certainly she has cast aside her other titles like, border czar and let's see, foreign diplomacy agent. None of those things are in her wheelhouse. Let's talk polls for a minute. Here's an interesting number to look at, okay? The Real Clear Politics, longtime purveyor of aggregated polls, the RCP average. At this stage of the game in 2016, presidential race, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, Clinton was up in the RCP average of polls by 6.7 points. 6.7. Now, you may recall that she lost the Electoral College, and thus Donald Trump became the 45th president of the United States, which is how we elect presidents in our country, for those of you who skipped civics class. But Clinton was up 6.7 in the RCP average at this stage of the game 8 years ago. She actually won the popular vote by 2.1. So, they were only off by 4.5 points. Well, no big deal there. This is just an indicator of how many of these polls are so wrong, many of them deliberately wrong. All right, let's skip ahead to 2020 at this stage of the game. Joe Biden held a 9.2 point advantage, we were told, over Donald Trump in 2020. Biden won the popular vote in the rigged election, so we don't know what it really was, by 4.4. Again, 9.2 was where he was leading in the polls, about a month out or less from Election Day, ends up with a 4.4 advantage. That shows you how skewed these things are. Now, fast forward to 2024. Kamala Harris, according to the RCP average of polls, holds a 1.7 point advantage over Donald Trump. That's not the 6.7 that Hillary Clinton allegedly had. That's not the 9.2 that Joe Biden had. 1.7. That's statistically insignificant. In other words, it's a wash right now, which means that given what the polls are telling us in the battleground states, things are shifting to Trump big time, at least in terms of the polls. They had shifted to Trump a long time ago, but the pollsters, mainly favoring the left, certainly didn't want you to know that or be enlightened about that shift, but here it comes. Here's a leading indicator of what we're talking about. Mark Mitchell, Rasmussen Reports, points out that Harris in the NBC poll is alleged to be up 1.5 points. 1.5 points. Again, in terms of margin of error, that's insignificant. A month ago, they had her up 5. Everything is shifting to the right. Let's listen to Mark Mitchell for a minute from Rasmussen and hear what he has to say.
I think two things can be true. One, that they're fake, but also that they are doing, I think, a little bit better job of being accurate, in my opinion, than they were the last time out. Because right now, if you look at the national numbers, Harris is only up about 1.5 points, and it's moving steadily to the right. I think what happened is a whole lot of people, the big issue is that the narrative was leading the polling, and the narrative was, oh, look at Kamala Harris. We have a new candidate. She's so fresh and brave and stunning. And all of the pollsters steadily moved left to accommodate that. But we all knew it wasn't going to be enough, and she was going to be put exactly in this situation, which is that she has absolutely no substance. So those polls are all moving back to the right now. And just, to name one of them, like the NBC put out a poll that showed the national popular vote tied. They had Harris up 5 points just a month ago. She didn't go from up 5 to tied. They were lying back then. It was plain for everybody to see looking at their crosstabs. But on a state level, everybody's really tight. I think people have accused the polling industry of what they call statistical herding, which is everybody's just ducking and making uncontroversial calls. But Wisconsin, Harris is up only 0.3 right now, and R+2 isn't in there. And Quinnipiac, who, was one of the people that had some really wild calls last time around, has Trump +2, exactly where we are in Wisconsin. Trafalgar's got Trump +1. New York Times Sienna's got Harris +2, but I'm pretty sure we'll probably go in and see a problem with the recalled vote there. And going to the other states, Pennsylvania and North Carolina's look like obvious wins now, because if there's any polling error at all to the left, then Trump's going to win by 2, 3, maybe even 4 points.
So let's continue that thread talking about Trump's relative positioning in the polling. Here's a report by Newsweek. And this aligns with what Mark Mitchell just said. Former President Donald Trump is polling stronger than he was at this point in 2016 and 2020, but the race against Vice President Harris remains close. Okay, here we go. Real Clear Politics gave Harris a 1.4 lead over Trump nationally, with swing states being even closer or breaking in favor of the former president. Ashley Koenig, director of the Eagleton Center for Public Interest Polling, told Newsweek that the race may appear closer this year due to ever-changing methodologies. A historically tight race, which this one certainly is, and improvements to aggregation. Quote, says Ashley, let's not forget that what 2016 and 2020 looked like. Incredibly close races in the end, that while a winner may have seemed evident, a standard-sized polling error could and did upend what polls were saying prior to Election Day. If there is a similar polling error as was the case in 2016 or 20, that could point to a Trump victory next month. Just because polls underestimated Trump's support in 2016 and 2020, that does not necessarily mean they will do so in November's. Pollsters have moved away from the traditional gold standard of phone surveys and now use text messages and panels. Pollsters also began including education in their weighting after 2016. So maybe finally the polling is getting better and Donald Trump is doing better as such in this his third go round in pursuit of the White House. So that's very interesting. Now, I wanted to share with you another polling organization, which you don't hear a lot about, but I really was attracted to their methodology and the size of their sample, which is important. This is Redfield and Wilton Strategies, which polls in partnership with The Telegraph. This is a UK-based polling operation operating in the United States, covering the U.S. elections, using their polling methodologies here. And I thought it was very interesting that a UK poll seems to be telling us some things that are probably worth paying attention to. In our latest edition of this tracker, says Redfield and Wilton, our presidential voting intention poll of 9,667 swing state voters finds Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are tied in 4 out of 10 swing states, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. They both lead in 3 other states. How about that? In every state polled except Florida and Minnesota, The candidates are either tied or the lead for either Trump or Harris is within the margin of error. Let's say that again. In every state polled except Florida and Minnesota, where Trump has a huge lead in Florida and Minnesota, Harris apparently has a large lead, the candidates are either tied or the lead for either Trump or Harris is within the margin of error. Also, in every state polled, listen to this, more 2020 Biden voters say they will now vote for Trump than 2020 Trump voters say they will vote for Harris. Between 9 and 18% of Biden 2020 voters in the 10 swing states polled now say they will vote for Trump. Do you realize what a swing that is? 9 to 18%? Listen to this also. Furthermore, a higher percentage of Trump 2020 voters say they will vote for Donald Trump in November than Biden 2020 voters say they will vote for Harris in 8 out of the 10 states. Between 85% and 92% of 2020 Trump voters now say they will vote for Trump again. That compares to 78 to 89% of Biden voters from 4 years ago who say they will vote for Harris. Now that tells you a lot. The action for Trump is gaining in two important categories. Among voters 4 years ago who voted for Biden, 9 to 18% are flipping and going for Trump, and 85 to 92% of Trump voters will vote for Trump again. That's huge. That is huge. So that's the UK poll out of London, Redfield and Wilton Strategies. Very interesting. Now, it has been coming up lately that you hear passing references to the possibility that Republicans will lose the U.S. House, will lose our majority in the U.S. House, while our chances of picking up Senate seats and taking control of the Senate are strong. That's very true. But what about these cautionary tales about the House? Should we really be fixated on losing the House? Right now, there are 17 districts in play for seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. The Democrats only need to pick up 4 to seize control of the House. That would be terrible, by the way, because the House does control the spending. And if you think we're spending a lot with Republicans controlling the House, I can only imagine what the debt bomb would do under Democrats. But let's weigh in here with the Rasmussen Reports folks again. They're very credible, by the way, even though Scott Rasmussen, the founder, is no longer affiliated with the organization. Less than a month before Election Day, and this is dated 7 October, so roughly around 10 days ago, recent, less than a month before Election Day, Republicans have a 2-point lead in their battle to maintain a narrow House majority. The latest Rasmussen Reports national telephone and online survey finds that if the elections for Congress were held now, 47% of likely U.S. voters would vote for the Republican candidate, while 45% would vote for the Democrat. Just 3% would vote for some other candidate. The GOP's advantage has shrunk since August, when they led by 5 points. 2 years ago, in October 2022, Republicans had a 4-point lead on the generic congressional ballot, and in the final poll, Republicans held a 5-point lead and scored a net gain of 9 seats to capture a House majority. So right now, even though you may hear things about the House slipping away from Republicans, we are leading in this Rasmussen generic congressional ballot polling. Just one poll, I understand that. You can't put all your money on any one poll or your confidence. You have to look at every poll with an extremely jaundiced eye, and just, it's good to have some knowledge of polling data. but it shouldn't control how you're feeling from day to day, whether you can sleep at night or whether you have an appetite or whatever you're feeling these days. Now, let's turn, because we must continue to turn each and every time we have an opportunity, to our fellow citizens in Western North Carolina. Do you realize that a couple of weeks have already passed, plus, and then some, really coming up on 3 weeks since they were devastated by the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and the unimaginable, unfathomable rainfall and flooding that devastated areas highly unaccustomed to that, at least not since the 1916 Great Flood, more than a century ago. But now here comes another element of concern regarding the situation in Western North Carolina. This is a report by the Carolina Public Press news organization. They draw this important bit of information to our attention. Another reason to keep all of these fellow citizens in our prayers, always daily. Evictions tend to rise sharply after natural disasters, such as this one in Western North Carolina, and activists are working to stop mass homelessness before it happens. Asheville and other areas in Western North Carolina already have largely unaffordable housing markets for many residents, and Helene, the aforementioned hurricane, threatens to make the problem worse. About 31% of all housing units in Asheville are occupied by those who rent. Now, running water is a rarity in much of the city due to the severe damage to Asheville's water plants. Those who do have water need to boil it before use. Many homes have no power, have substantial damage, or mold, or are difficult to access due to washed out streets. What happens when the home you rent is no longer inhabitable or lacks the most basic comforts of modern life? What rights do you have? One child care worker who rents a house in Asheville says that his landlord informed him that late fees on rent payments would be waived, but that's all the landlord said. He made no other promises. Quote, I immediately emailed and asked them about a possible rent reduction, this Asheville tenant said. When they replied, they only sent me the link for FEMA applications and gave me no information about why they were still charging full rent for the month. Now here's the reality, according to David Bartholomew of the Pisgah Legal Services team. The tenant's duty to pay rent and the landlord's duty to repair property are not legally interdependent on one another in North Carolina. Just because a landlord has not fulfilled his or her duty to repair does not mean the renter is off the hook. Therefore, and this is the bad news, the number of eviction cases in Western North Carolina is expected to rise dramatically over the coming months, as this is one of the main reasons why. Meaning, renters can't or don't want to pay their rent because their house is in shambles and they can't actually live in it. Tenants don't pay, landlords want the rent paid. They're landlords. That's how they operate. And, by the way, not all landlords are evil, heartless, gutless people. So you will hear stories of, I'm sure, certain landlords coming forward and trying their best to do the right thing. But get this, courts just reopened in Buncombe County this week, and 40 evictions came before the court right away. 21 additional evictions came before the court in Henderson County. These are all adjacent to Asheville. This is just a fraction of what it is on a weekly basis, says an executive director of the NC Housing Coalition. The cases heard during this period were on the docket before Hurricane Helene, but anyone evicted will be on the streets of a city strangled by disaster. So people who are being evicted for reasons that have nothing to do with the natural disaster are going to be evicted into a situation that is way less than bearable. The reality of the storm is that there is no place for anyone to go right now, says Samuel Gunter. Both Gunter and Bartholomew are advocating for an eviction moratorium in Western North Carolina. After a natural disaster, an eviction moratorium is a very effective way to slow things down and make sure we are not making more people homeless, Bartholomew said. So this is the situation. Homelessness on top of everything else. Gunter is concerned that many whose homes are uninhabitable are unable to take advantage of FEMA's temporary shelter assistance. Here's another problem. He says, the last time I got data, there were 143,000 households signed up for FEMA individual shelter assistance. But there's only around 1,400 families in the agency's temporary shelters. That's a huge disparity. No kidding, 10 times more applicants than shelter space. There's a whole swath of folks that qualify for temporary shelter, but the hotel placements are in South Carolina or Knoxville, Tennessee. One of our employees lives in Asheville. They don't have water. They were awarded a temporary shelter assistance in South Carolina, but her husband is a doctor. He's working daily. They cannot move to South Carolina for 8 weeks while they wait for Asheville's water system to be restored. So there are solutions, but many times they are not adequate for the needs on the ground. Meanwhile, I mentioned FEMA. And, the federal government and the Biden administration is very concerned that FEMA is attracting any kind of criticism at all for its tepid response in Western North Carolina, even though people on the ground who know what they see and what they're experiencing contradict the official narrative from on high because they're living through hell, okay? House Speaker Mike Johnson last weekend goes on the Sunday morning show Face the Nation on CBS with the insufferable Margaret Brennan, who you may recall participated in the Trump-Harris debate as one of the moderators, Margaret Brennan. She has Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, a Republican from Louisiana, on to talk about the FEMA response to the Western North Carolina disaster zone. Now take a look at this. By the way, none other than Elon Musk posts this on his platform called X. Elon Musk posts this exchange between Margaret Brennan and House Speaker Johnson. First, the segment that actually aired on CBS that people saw watching the network, and then what was actually taped and withheld from the viewers. Take a look at this.
So that's a different accounting than this 2% you say was distributed.
Yeah, so they've obligated some funds, but they've only distributed 2%. The rescue and recovery effort's still going on, and then we address the rest of it.
So that's a different accounting than this 2% you say was distributed.
Yeah, so they've obligated some funds, but they've only distributed 2%. And when I was there on the ground, and you should go, bring the cameras and talk to the people there. They'll tell you, don't take politicians' words for this or the administration's word. Talk to the people there on the ground. They had not been provided the resources almost 2 weeks out from the storm that they desperately needed. And when I was there, 13 days post the storm hitting that state, people are still being rescued. They're stuck in the higher elevations in the mountains because the roads are down and all the rest. So they need every available resource and all hands on deck. The rescue and recovery effort's still going on, and then we address the rest of it.
Now, we're not ready to leave Western North Carolina just yet. Wasn't that despicable? How deliberate of CBS running cover for FEMA. They do it for everything, anything to protect the ineptitude of their elected tyrants. But we're going to stick with Western North Carolina. You may recall that in the very earliest days of the disaster, when the sun came up that first morning and everybody realized that all hell had truly broken loose, one of the initial reactions by the citizens of this state were to go to the problem, go to the disaster zone. And among those who did that most efficiently were those who had aircraft at their disposal. Volunteers who own fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters. They immediately swung into action with their aircraft. One of them was a gentleman named Greg Biffle. NASCAR racing fans recognize that name because he has been a truck and NASCAR stock car race driver for 20-some years. He was a Rookie of the Year in the Busch Series, the NASCAR Busch Series stock car circuit in 2001. Very well known to race fans. He also happens to have a pilot's license and a helicopter. Greg Biffle said, I'm going where the action is. I'm going to get out there and deliver supplies and medications and clothing. And he started doing that virtually on day one. He spent 2 weeks doing that. He would literally fly his helicopter to and from his home in Mooresville, which is sort of outside of the disaster area near Lake Norman, for those of you familiar with that part of the state. He'd put it down on his property, get a good night's sleep, get up in the morning, fire it up, and go at it again. And he did it for 2 weeks. He finally took a break, and he recorded about a 20-minute report from his experiences on his YouTube channel. Very interesting what he had to say. We'll share some of it with you in a moment. But here's something to take away from his experiences. He adds to the texture of what has been going on with regard to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the needs of the folks out west. Here's what he had to say. We flew all of these missions, meaning he and fellow volunteer pilots. And I've been on the ground up there. And I've not encountered any FEMA people. But from the air, I believe I've seen a few FEMA things being set up. However, the first 4 days, they were not there. FEMA came in, I think, after the word got out, after they realized there were some initial people there assessing damage or whatever, but they were certainly not delivering water, food, and medicine to people, flying in insulin in the helicopters. They were not doing the things that we were doing. Let's have a look at the rest of Greg Biffle's YouTube report, and then we'll be right back after hearing that.
I think everybody was unprepared for this scale of this event. But we need help from everyone. We need help from FEMA. We need help from the private citizens and the private aviation community and everybody that reached out. So I'm unclear on all that. I did see the Guard come in on day 3, set up fuel trucks. Day 4, they had one Black Hawk on the ground. And it looked like then day 5 and on, they started flying some missions, as we're flying about 150 missions per day of civilian helicopters and fixed wing aircraft. I think the one day it was 165 missions, around to 200 per airport. I don't want to take credit for this whole thing. Certainly, I'm getting a lot of credit. There are so many people that have stories just like mine. Petrie, let me tell you a story. Andy Petrie is in Daytona Beach getting ready to go on a cruise. He sees the post. He sees all this stuff. He calls me on the phone and said, I'm coming to help. I don't know what his wife thought about that, but they rented a car and drove home, stopped at Buc-ee's, and bought every fuel can they had. As I told him, people need fuel for their generators. And drove home, got in his helicopter, and started flying missions. Because he's from the mountains. He grew up in that area, and he has, a shop in that area, machines and friends, and that's not the reason why. The reason why is he wanted to help.
He could not land that helicopter everywhere where there was need. In a previous social media post, right near the beginning of the disaster, he shared a video in which there was an individual on the ground with a mirror. He was holding the mirror up to the sky, hoping that the reflection would direct Biffle's eyes down to him so that Biffle would realize, hey, I'm a person down here who needs help. Biffle said he tried 5 times to land the chopper. It was very treacherous. Couldn't get it on the ground. Kept at it. The 6th time he landed it. Was able to drop off EpiPens, food, gasoline, whatever he had packed into that little helicopter of his. Really, and that's his is one story. There are countless other pilots and courageous citizens who are to this very moment still driving and flying loads of supplies, and the weather is getting treacherous in the mornings. It's getting very cold. There was 2 inches of snow in Banner Elk just in the past 24 hours. So they're already facing snow, and it's not even the end of October yet. So pray, donate, be vigilant, never give up on our folks out in Western North Carolina. Okay, let's recap. What are we doing starting on October 17th, Thursday, October 17th? You'll be watching me on Thursday, October 17th. We're going to the polls for early voting. We're voting from 8 in the morning to 7:30. There will also be voting this Saturday and Sunday, slightly more limited hours. The only day you can vote on Sunday during early voting is coming up Sunday, October 20, 11 to 5. Now think what you can do with a Sunday, this coming Sunday, what you can plan. You can go to church and pray for our country, pray for Donald Trump, pray for the people of Western North Carolina. Thank God Almighty for every blessing that he bestows upon us. Then you can go have a nice brunch. Then you can get in your car and drive to early voting with your sample ballot in hand, informed, educated, and prepared. You can take along friends from church or brunch. Get them to vote too. Guess what? If they're not registered to vote, no problem. During early voting, you can register on the spot, right then and there. And then what do you have to do? Wait a day or two? Sit around for a week? Oh no. You vote immediately. You register, then you vote. Your vote's in the bank. It's in the pipeline. You're done. You've done your thing. And then you've got 16 more days, 15, 16 more days to go out and recruit other voters, other people who need to be registered. It's on you. It's on each and every one of us to do that. And if you are literally unable to vote early, then put a big old red circle around November 5. And on that day, you get 13 hours to vote. Election day, Tuesday, November 5, 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. at the poll assigned to your precinct. A little different than early voting. Multiple locations for voting, but you can only go on election day to the one assigned to the precinct in which you reside. However, during early voting, you can pick or choose. You can go to Carthage, the Ag Center, or you can go to Aberdeen to the Recreation Center by the lake. Get out there, be motivated, vote. encourage your friends to vote, be informed, be energized, and keep the faith always. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you'll also tune in to WEEB 990 AM and 97.3 FM and 104.1 FM weekday mornings at 7:30, where I have the privilege of co-hosting Mornings with the Leader Man. That's on WEEB. We cover a lot of ground on that program. And then if you will email me at the address right here, you can subscribe to my weekly electronic newsletter. It is the Liberty Digest. This is the Liberty Podcast. The newsletter is the Liberty Digest. Do you see the common theme there? Yes, you do. So be sure to subscribe. You'll get that every week, usually on Tuesdays, sometimes on Wednesdays. Depends on how my week is going. Thank you once again for joining us here on the Liberty Podcast. And we'll see you again next time.